So legal competence as a business owner often comes down to two things: knowing what legal issue needs to be addressed and knowing who can help you address the legal issue. Give me the next 5 minutes and I'll walk you through a simple assessment that you can do that'll uncover where your legal exposure is highest and what to address first. Now, if you want our contract clarity checklist, so that you can start applying this to every agreement on your desk, just drop contract below and I'll send it over to you. Now, my name is Robert Shettyarchi. I'm the founder of Signal Lawyers and A.N. Hans Law Firm. We help small business owners understand their legal situation completely, clearly, and in language that actually makes sense for their business. In every video, I'm sharing with you one piece of advice that you can help implement immediately in your decision-making. Now, here's what I hear too often from business owners at Signal Lawyers. I've been winging it legally for years, and I don't know how I need to fix this. Now, here's the thing. They're not necessarily in crisis. They haven't lost a lawsuit, but they've been in business long enough to know that they've been operating out of luck and goodwill rather than infrastructure. And they've started to notice that there's a gap between what they've built and how well it's actually protected. So what most business owners do, and it's understandable, is to treat legal issues as a to-do item that never becomes urgent to be prioritized. They might know that their contracts are outdated or that they've used a template to create their contractual relationships. They might know that their employment documents need a review. But without knowing the risks associated with these documents and in what order, the whole thing stays on the someday list until something forces it off. And here's the reason why, even if you're anxious about these risks, it doesn't necessarily produce action. Because most people, in my experience, will only decide to fix something once they actually know what needs to be fixed. Without that knowledge, most people are simply going to be guessing. And frankly, most people don't make decisions on guesswork. So you end up doing nothing because everything feels equally vague and equally overwhelming. And that's when you get into problems, because that legal exposure never gets addressed. Now, the business owners who get this right aren't necessarily the more disciplined. They just have an understanding and a solution and a framework to identify where that risk exposure is highest and how to address that exposure with a simple action. Now, the solution I talked about at the start of the video, it starts off by asking, when did you actually read a contract before you sign it? Now, I don't mean skim it, I mean actually read it. Now, if you can't remember off the answer is never, that's going to be where your highest probability score is going to be. Because in my experience as a lawyer, the clauses that get contracts or get people in trouble are the ones that are buried in the fine print. So the second question, if your most important business relationship starts getting into trouble, what does the paper trail look like? So think about your biggest client, a key supplier, or maybe a business partner. Is the arrangement documented? Is the documentation current? Does it reflect what the parties agreed to? Or does it reflect things that happened 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the relationship was at its earliest? It wasn't really reflecting, or it doesn't really reflect what the relationship is like now. The relationships that matter most are usually the ones with the most gap between what was documented and what's actually existing, what's actually operating. And then the last question to ask is, do you know what your actual legal obligations are to your current employees or contractors at this very moment? Now, what I mean by this is not in theory, but do you have a written agreement? Do you know if you were to terminate them, how much of notice you need to give? And again, this is not about the dramatic scenarios, it's in the routine obligation that accumulate quietly. Another really good example is intellectual property issues, right? Do you know whether you as a business owner have ownership over the things that your employees create? That's often a huge gap. Now, what these three questions will tell you is that you will most likely have exposure in at least one of these areas. And the good news is that this is not necessarily a crisis, it's information. And it's information that you can then use to try and address with your business advisor or with a lawyer. And the pro tip here is that don't try to fix everything at once. Identify the one or two places where the gap between what you have and what you actually need is going to be the largest. The things that you have knowledge with or that have the experience with, great, you don't need anyone to help you. But it's where you don't that where expert kind from a lawyer, HR professional, or another professional advisor, these sorts of investments can earn its cost many times over. Now, again, if you want our contract learn checklist so that you can close the most common legal gaps that business owners have, just drop contract below and I'll send it over to you. Remember, the business owner who has a specific understanding of where they're exposed legally is the one that's going to make sure that those risks aren't going to come into reality. They make one decision, they close the gap, and they build from there.